안녕하십니까? 강원 통일교육센터와
Good morning. We are now going to begin the session 7-3, but before that, I would like to make a housekeeping announcement. The session 7-3 is about the internationalization of the unification education and unification public diplomacy. For this session, simultaneous interpretation is available. Please set your channel to channel 5 for Korean and 6 for English. And if you do have any questions, then please scan the QR code or click the More button to leave the question. Then we are going to entertain those questions during the Q&A session. Now we are going to begin the session 7-3 of the KGFP 2022. I would like to introduce to you the moderator, Park Jong-chul. Good morning. I am honored to serve as a moderator for this session. My name is Park Jong-chul, and it's indeed a great pleasure to have this meaningful session. As you know, the unification issue is something that South and North Korea should take initiative, but international cooperation is a very critical element as well. Nowadays, the audiences in the international society have become diverse, and actors have become diverse as well. So compared to the past, in our discourses on the unification issues, we really have to provide a customized strategies befitting different types or groups of people and audiences. And in this regard, in order to build a consensus on the unification, we would like to explore how we can provide international education and also how we can conduct the public diplomacy that target not only the public officers but also the public, general public. So the public diplomacy, it targets a lot of civic groups as well as the private organizations and the general public. And therefore, it has a very wide ranges of audiences. And also internally within Korea, unlike the past, we have a growing number of foreigners residing in Korea. And also the population mix has become very diverse nowadays. So we have a lot of foreigners residing in Korea, multicultural families, as well as North Korean defectors. So as you could see, the various constituents living in our society, we have to develop methodologies to provide effective unification education for them. So we are going to deal with these topics in this session. And for this, we have 2 presentations, which will be followed by a discussion session with the 5 discussants. The first presenter is the Jeon Byung-gil, Secretary General of the Uni Korea Foundation. And the second presenter is the PhD candidate, Mr. Han Chung-il of the University of Cambridge. And he is actually a very active researcher in North Korean issues. So Peter Han, or Han Chung-il in Korean name, will give us the presentation on the current status and future prospects of the unification education. And for a discussion, we have 5 panelists. First, from the Wuhan University of China, we have Associate Professor Wang Gaga. He got his PhD in Incheon University. And with the invitation of the Choi Jong-yeon Academic Society, he's actually residing in Korea, so he's with us offline, in person. And from Poland, we have the Professor Marlena Blihash, of the World Studies University in Warsaw, Poland. And from Korea, we have Ha Kwang-min, Director of Administration of the Seoul Unification Education Center, and Baek In-ju, Senior Research Fellow of the Han Peace Institute, as well as the Jung Dae-jin, Director of Administration in Gangwon Unification Education Center, as well as a professor of Hanla University. So they will serve as panelists. And because we are constrained by time, so I would like to give 20 minutes to each presenter or 15 to 20 minutes. And for panelists, because we have about 5 panelists today, so I would like to give 60 minutes to each panelist so that we can spare some time for Q&A and general discussion session. Then, now I'd like to invite the first speaker.
Mr. Jeon Byung-gil from Uni-Korea Foundation. Yes, thank you very much. As was introduced, my name is Jeon Byung-gil from Uni-Korea Foundation. Allow me to take my mask off. It is my pleasure to talk about the education for foreigners living in Korea, about the education of the Republic of Korea and the DPRK. I have to tell you that Korea is already a mosaic society because we are living with many diverse ethnicities in Korea. If you look at the statistics, we have official and unofficial numbers. Altogether, 2.5 foreign people are living in Korea. After the COVID-19, we see some reductions of the number, but still it maintains the level of 2.5 million. If you see the composition of the stayers, many of them are coming from China, Vietnam, and many other countries. Therefore, it is not uncommon to encounter children of multicultural families at school. The number has doubled or tripled over the last couple of years. We have about 150,000 students who are from the multicultural families. We expect the number is only increasing over the course of the years. Now, if you look at the number of international students in Korea, many people expected that the number will decrease because of the pandemic, but the reality was not that, because we are seeing the constant increase or maintenance of the international students at 150,000 students. Since we have the 3 million Korean students at universities or the college level, this 150,000 is not a small number. Also, if you see the breakdown, we see the majority of them are coming from other Asian countries, to be followed by the North America and Europe. One thing I can tell you here is that the unification education can be something not only for Koreans but also for the international people. As the society of Korea is becoming more diverse, the requests and demand for the society are also in diverse forms. Let's take an example of the national song of Korea. So this song has the theme of the unification. If you see the lyrics here, the unification is reviving the nation, and the unification will make our country to be united again. I had an interview of the international people to know what they think about this word nation, and they said that they felt a little bit estranged from the word of the nation. Because we've been thinking about the education of the unification only for the Koreans. We've been focused on the nation or ethnicity only. Now is the time for us to open our eyes to the outside world of Korea. We're now having a lot of members coming from other countries, so probably it is the time for us to have our education in the context of the international mixture. Another thing is that when we train or education of the unification, what would they mean to international people? And also for the multicultural families, what would the unification mean to them? What about the migrant workers? So if we want to have the curriculum for the unification, what content is there? I've been working for this foundation since 2015, and from 2016 we made the official curriculum. We faced the situation where all the multinational families or the migrant workers as well as the international students, they have to be known to the concept of unification. And what worried us the most is how we can approach this curriculum. And I've been also having the conducting of the tours to the sites that represent division of the North and South Korea. This was very effective because they were able to see what really happened in the Korean peninsula. One thing that is regrettable is that we didn't have the docent who was explaining in detail about the history. Another thing that we did in our foundation is to have the tour to the DMZ as well. And we added the program of trekking around the DMZ area. That program was quite attractive and became very popular. But another thing regrettable here is that we were able to emphasize the importance of nature or environment, but we didn't have enough courses on history. Another program that we did is the debate program. With the international students, especially the college students, we had the lectures to be followed by discussions and debates. If we had international schools for the universities, we have such curriculums and programs for debate and discussions. The topics they cover are normally human rights or the North Korean defectors. Sometimes they have the lecture done by the people who could speak English. If they were not able to speak Korean, we had used interpreters to do the consecutive interpretation. So these programs were available, but another thing that can be improved here is that we didn't have the brochures and we didn't have the materials that we can refer to. Most of the programs also were just finished with one-time off events, and there was no consistency or continuity. So that's another thing that can be improved. And for the experiences like these, many international people were interested. So we are doing the campaigns to attract more international students. And also for the planning and preparations, we invite people to join together to put their hands to make the programs available. And even if we want to visit North Korea, nobody can at the moment. Therefore, the easiest way to get to the closest to the North Korea is to deal with the North Korean defector issue and the human rights issue. This program has been the most vibrant among our programs. We also have regular sessions of the trainings and education for the migrant workers. With the migrant workers, we have the tours to the division sites as well as the DMZ. From 2018, for 3 years, we also had the programs for the workers from Cambodia. That was very popular, but we had the issue of language because there was a language barrier. Cambodian workers were not able to speak Korean, neither English. So we had to use 3 languages at the same time, Korean, English, and Cambodian. We had to use some people who were able to speak both languages in the middle. So the language barrier is something that we have to deal with very urgently. While having all these programs, this is our conclusion. So overall, my sense is that we didn't have enough background about the history of the Korean peninsula, especially they are coming from other countries. If they had more information about the unification issues and history of Korea, it would have been more effective. Then we should have the better understanding about the Korean situation, the history, the culture, and politics. So we have to improve on that part by having more basis of the understanding before having these programs. The next thing we can improve is the language barrier issue, as I said. The level of Korean was quite low, and there was no deep understanding about the culture based on the language. So even if we gave some lectures, the lectures were not immediately absorbed by the students because they didn't have any prior knowledge about Korea. And even if we wanted to have some discussions, the discussion points sometimes digressed because of the lack of understanding from the beginning. So we have to have the better content in languages like English and Korean at the same time. We do have a lot of textbooks, however, in the market, especially the politics and the history, but they're not easy enough to be observed by the regular people or the international people. So we have to create the content more immediately understandable to the readers or listeners. And the programs are mostly were in Korean, so we should have more English-based programs. That requires invitation of many English-speaking lecturers. So we'd like to have this opportunity to ask many more people who can speak English to become our lecturers. So we have to increase our pool of the speakers and lecturers. Another thing that can be improved is that we used to have the one-time off events only. That's because of the lack of the budget, partially. And we had to have the outreach programs. We really wanted to make it shine with one-time off event by having a lot of publicity. But that doesn't mean that we can continue over time with the second or third rounds of these events. So we have to correct this problem by having more continuity. Also, we know that there are many diverse characteristics among the foreigners depending on where they are coming from. Therefore, it would be better for us to have the groupings of these international students so that they can share at least their own background when they also learn education of the unification. Of course, we tried many other things. So we divided the groups into the specialist groups and general public groups. For the general public groups, the existing experiences and lectures should be rearranged. And for the specialist groups, we found that the previous lectures were not deep enough. So we wanted to have a more systematic course developed for these specialist programs, combining expertise, debate, and lectures. So we put more focus on the specialist group programs than the general public programs. So in 2017, we had the joint collaboration with Aju University, and we created a curriculum called Unification of Korea and Beyond. That course was for the international students who are living in Korea. So we created an official program lasting 16 weeks. That course was attended by more than 30 students who are coming from many countries. So we had the calculation of where they're coming from. So they were representing more than 15 countries because one or two students from each country participated in the course. What we covered as topics were history, before and after division, field studies. For example, we went to Cheongdong in Seoul, and development, human rights, North and South Korea economic cooperation, international relations, North Korean defectors, private-led unification campaigns, and so forth. All these students were asked to have their own projects individually, and then at the end of the course, they made presentations before other students. This is the syllabus, but I don't have time to show you all these pages. Moving on, I can also tell you that where we went. I said that we went to Cheongdong in Seoul, and Cheongdong is full of historical sites. So inside Seoul, this Cheongdong area can show a lot of things to the international students. And also, we found that international students want to look around Seoul area as a city. So we used the place to have a site tour. We benchmarked Boston to show the histories of that. So we had the walking route for the historical things. Textbooks can tell them a lot of things, but looking and walking across the streets here full of history could be also helpful for the students. And we were able to discuss the issues of the unification, and they were mingling with their counterparts in Korea. All the young students, both from Korea and the international members, could have their exchanges. So this program was quite successful. That was in English, and this is the program brochure. And you're looking at the pictures of the students who participated. You see the embassy of Russia to Korea. And you also see the picture of the Historical Museum of Korea. So we had the experience, lectures, and discussions. Let's move on these pages as well. This academia was opened in 2017. Ever since that, we had a lot of courses planned for the international students by our foundation. We also explored many lecturers. For example, Mr. Choi Do-uk as a leader of the NKF, and Professor Lankov of Kookmin University, and Mr. Park Seok-hyun, and Mr. Hwang Jin-sol from Dubridge, and Mr. Park Seok-kyu from Link. These people are the newly found lecturers. And anybody who was an expert as well as English speakers was invited to our speakers. We had a mixture of these people for representing our programs. And also we had a lot of outreach programs. You're looking at the posters that we used at that time when we had these programs opened. Out of the international students, we also found many students who are at their master's degree or doctorate degree. So as I said, the language was the biggest issue. So we decided to have an official language of English. Even our staff were speaking English. All the lectures were done in English. We didn't use any interpretation, and everything was done in English. We decided to do that because if we decide only one official language, everything will follow in that language order. And if we just have our Korean language used, we found that the level of Korean among the international students was quite diverse and different. So some low level of Korean was meaning that they could not attend Korean programs. So English was better for anybody, whether they have Korean language or not. Now this is the brochure to show you, and this is showing how we used our outside lectures. So this is the picture of our lectures at that time. Every semester, when we had these programs, we also had the dining opportunities as well. The purpose is to have the networking and socializing. So we looked at all of the students while doing this here, and we learned that what they really want is that because they are residing in Korea, they miss people, although they are coming from other countries. So they wanted to mingle together with other students in these opportunities. So we had our various programs. So even for dining opportunities, we wanted to accommodate every different sector of the world by having different types of food and meals, the different courses. Koreans are easy once they are get together for eating because we don't have to have diverse menus. But when we have the international students, we had to serve all different meals depending on their religions and the diets and so on. Therefore, we took extra care about preparing the meals. And also, when we had our English program only, in the beginning, of course, there was difficulty of accommodating to the English courses, but they were very quick in adjusting themselves to English-only courses. But we have stopped these programs because of the COVID-19, but we are about to open again. So last year in Chuncheon with Gangwon University and Chuncheon University and Hallym University, we also tried these programs with them with big popularity, and we are about to resume our programs very soon. So since my time is up, I'm going to just wrap up. My conclusion is that our country is becoming more diverse and we are already a mosaic society. But only for the unification education, we have been focusing on Korean students only. Now is the time to widen our eyes toward the international students, migrant workers, and international students who are reaching 150,000. Many of the international students might also have opportunity to stay here longer, and even if they go back to their countries, they are likely to become a very high profile people in their own countries if they have very good understanding about unification in Korea and the Korean Peninsula situation, they will be very much beneficial for the international relations down the road. So we have to be very mindful about what we have to do for these people. I really look forward to having many supports from the government authorities. Our wish is that we do not end our programs as one-time off programs. We want to make sure that these programs are consistent and continuous in the future. And that way we can make our programs prevalent and applicable to the rest of the world. So in order to have those dreams possible, we really need more support on this. And that will be a very good example for the public education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Director General Chun Byung-gil said that the targets for public diplomacy reside not just in overseas, but also foreigners living in Korea, as well as the members of multicultural family. They should also be included in public diplomacy, and for this he gave us very specific and personal examples. In particular, he mentioned that it is important to develop English content for them and also develop a pool of expert lecturers in order to ensure the consistency of and sustainability of activities. We have to make further efforts. Following that, we are now going to invite the next speaker. And so Mr. Han Chung-il, PhD candidate student of the University of Cambridge, will give us the presentation. So his presentation will be based on his own experience of studying unification and Korean studies overseas. Thank you very much. As introduced, I am Han Chung-il, and currently I'm studying North Korean issues in Cambridge University. Through the presentation by Director General Chun Byung-gil, I was able to see and hear how the programs are managed and operated from educators' perspective. Now I'm going to deliver to you students' perspective, especially the case that I'm going to present to you today is that it's not really the course that is sponsored by the Ministry of Unification or any kind of unification research institutes in Korea. Rather, it's just a part of the Cambridge University education program, and it deals with the history of Cold War, and as a part of the course, the Korean War and unification issues are dealt with. So in that sense, I think that my presentation will shed a light on what kind of education is being provided to students in overseas universities. So today I'm going to talk about how and give you the brief introduction of the Cold War History Seminar at Cambridge University. And because the topic of the seminar is the Cold War history, so it does not specifically deal with the Korean Peninsula issues, but there are three aspects of the Korean Peninsula issues. So the Korean War and also the Korea's relation with other neighboring countries and denuclearization. So I'm going to briefly touch upon them. And also I participated in this seminar personally. So in the first year, I was a student, and in the second year, I participated in the course as a teaching assistant. And I actually had some opportunity to talk about the seminar with other students as well. So I would like to share with you my experience. Then I'm going to talk about how we can internationalize the unification education. Let me first give you the overview of this seminar. The seminar is provided in the Department of the East Asian Studies in Cambridge University, and the course is open for undergraduate and graduate students in East Asian Studies Department. And also it's very free, and any students majoring in history or politics or diplomacy can attend the class. And the number of students are not that big, so around 10 students. And it's not a one-way lecture, rather it's in the seminar format, which means that there are a lot of freewheeling, in-depth discussions going on. And in order to have and participate in such discussions, the students have to read a lot of books and papers. So the session, there are 8 sessions in the fall semester and 8 in the spring. And during the fall semester, students learn about the history of the Cold War in the chronological order. And during the spring semester, they learn about the Cold War and how it affects the East Asia. And so these are the questions that professors ask to students, and students have to explore answers to this question. First, should Korean War be understood as civil war or international war, or can it be interpreted as both civil war and international war? So from Korean perspective, as a Koreaner, as a Korean, I thought when I first heard about this question, I was a bit perplexed. Now, how could the Korean War be understood as civil war? Because for us, it's like the coup or the uprising and so on. But in fact, a lot of foreign scholars, including the Bruce Cummings, they do have the view that the Korean War should be understood as civil war. So from this course, I was able to see more diverse views on the Korean War from foreign scholars' perspectives. So some foreign scholars define the Korean War as civil war, which is very fresh to me. And the second question that and also the professor provides a very detailed account of what really happened in the Korean War by month. So in fact, the Korean student will learn very broadly about the Korean War, like when it happened, when it was concluded, and so on. But in this seminar, the professor provides a very detailed account on what actually happened in the Korean War. For example, like how Kim Il-sung got the approval from Mao Zedong and when, and how it affected the neighboring countries and so on. So it's a very, very practical and detailed course. And also it teaches that the Korean War is described in diverse ways in the US, China, and Japan. So for Korean people, it's a very tragic, fratricidal war. But from the American or Japanese or Chinese perspective, the war could be described in a very different way. For example, like for Chinese students, they understood Korean War as the war that fights against the U.S. And in fact, the son of Mao Zedong participated and was dispatched to the Korean War, and he got killed. And therefore, Chinese students tend to have very different understanding about the Korean War from Korean students. So we really have to broaden our horizons and also understand how other countries or other people could think about the Korean War. We have to acknowledge that there could be diverse perspectives. Then the last question that the professor asked is what kind of implication the Korean War has on today's society. We also had the session on North Korea. And when providing unification education, we have to provide the courses on how North Korea should be interpreted and how it should be understood. And one thing that's particular and special about this seminar is that they don't teach North Korea as a sort of the isolated entity. Rather, they try to understand North Korea in the broader context of the international relations, and they compare North Korea with various other countries, for example, like North Korea versus the Cambodia, and even like the China versus Taiwan. These kind of issues are all explored in the seminar. In other words, North Korea is not viewed as an isolated case. Rather, they teach North Korea in the relations with other countries. And also another important topic for the seminar is the denuclearization with regards to North Korea. So resolving denuclearization, it should be a priority. So there are very heated debates on how to resolve denuclearization of North Korea. And the professor says that we have made tremendous attempt to resolve this issue. And then he gives the detailed account on what kind of methodologies or attempts were made to resolve North Korea's nuclear issues. And then the students will engage in almost like free-wheeling discussion. So this indicates how strong interest in this topic. Then it also provides the education on Cold War and the relations of the East Asian countries. So the cooperation among South and North Korea, as well as China and Russia, is critical for unification. So we have to understand their perspectives and their approaches, and also how their national interests are aligned with the unification of the Korean Peninsula. This is something that the Korean scholars and professors have missed in providing unification education to students. So I think we have to include this part as well. Each country in East Asia has different perspectives on history. That's why it was difficult for them to cooperate. So that seminar deals with this topic as well. And I could learn two lessons from the seminar. First of all, the course emphasized and provides a detailed account on how Korea got divided in the backdrops of the global historical trends. So, for example, like the Korean War, it goes beyond the simple understanding of the Korean War being a tragic fratricidal war. Rather, it raises the questions on the roles and responsibilities of the U.S., USSR, and China. And such views that the class offers are aligned with the recent trends in the studies of the Cold War history. So it's not just the U.S. versus the USSR conflict. Rather, it tries to illuminate on the issues from regional, local actors' perspectives, like how the Cold War should be understood from the perspectives of North Korea or Cambodia or Vietnam. So these diverse views are introduced through the seminar. And secondly, denuclearization. So students are highly interested in this issue, and also teachers and professors take this issue very seriously. And the course explores diverse ways to achieve denuclearization, and sometimes they raise the question on the necessity of denuclearization, that we really have to achieve denuclearization. And not just delivering the perspectives of the South Korea, it also talks about the perspectives of North Korea, and as well as the approaches that the China, Japan, and Russia take in this issue. Now I'm going to talk about the implications. So through this seminar case, we can see that even without the title of the unification education, there could be a lot of elements of unification education embedded in the course. As I said earlier, this seminar wasn't sponsored by the Korean organizations, but you can see that this independent seminar provides a very detailed and in-depth education on unification, and also compared to what is offered in Korea, sometimes they deliver even more diverse views and perspectives to deal with this topic. And in that sense, I believe they really have to have exchanges with other universities, not limited to universities in Korea only. And this could be a very sensitive issue. And in fact, when they hear unification, the first thing that comes to students' mind is no longer North and South Korea. Rather, what comes to their mind first is the China-Taiwan relations. So in the sense, I think that the Korean government should exert more efforts to diversify the unification education programs. And also, rather than creating the vague expectation or fantasy about peace and unification, it is very important to cultivate accurate and sharp understanding in the past and the present situation, to raise awareness and interest in Korean Peninsula unification issues. And I personally believe that the unification education for Koreans and non-Koreans should be divided in terms of its purposes and methodologies. So they should be different. Of course, for foreigners, and also for foreigners, the goal should not be to instill desire and wish for unification and share the sense of pain with Koreans. Rather, I think the course should teach them how their national interests can be matched and aligned with unification. For example, together with the Hitotsuba University in Japan, the Cambridge University hosts a joint seminar every year. And 20 students from Cambridge and the 20 students from Japanese University team up together, and they explore and discuss the issues on how Japan and the UK can have strategic partnership. And then the result is submitted to the governments of the two countries. And one of the issues that we deal with in this seminar is North Korea denuclearization. In other words, how the UK and Japan can participate in resolving the North Korea's denuclearization issue, and centering around this topic, the UK student and the Japanese student have in-depth discussions. So although this seminar is not sponsored by any of these governments, you can see that there is a very high interest in this topic, and already training is now being provided. And therefore, rather than extending what is offered to Korean to foreigners, rather we have to develop a more specialized courses for foreigners to teach them about how the unification on the Korean Peninsula can serve the benefits of their own nations. Then I think the unification education will be more effective. So through the UK's example, so far I have talked about how we can internationalize the unification education. And my presentation, as I said earlier, this seminar was not titled with the unification education. Rather, I just talked about how the UK universities deal with the issues on the Korean Peninsula. And as I said earlier, rather than having a nationalist understanding in promoting unification education, I think that we have to accommodate diverse perspectives from various countries. And also we have to understand how this historical fact could be understood differently by various countries. And by doing so, I believe that we can explore the way for peaceful unification together with other countries. And with that, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. So he's from University of Cambridge and has been giving us the lectures and programs done by the University of Cambridge to let us know what practicalities we can take. That was a very lively demonstration of what they teach there. So perspectives on the education of unification should be diversified using various cases with other countries, especially the unilateral system of education should be now replaced or made in conjunction with other types of programs to find some nexus with other countries' conditions as well. Now we have 5 discussants. So our host today is Gangwon Unification Education Center. And with that, we have a lot of people invited here. So I'd like to also have this session to have the Q&A later on. We also have our questions pre-delivered to them as well. So based on that, I'd like to have you all have a free discussion. So all your discussions should be confined to 6 minutes, please. Now, first of all, I'd like to have Mr. Wang Jia from Wuhan University, China. So one thing I was asked by the organizer is to ask you to think what efforts are needed in order to be more proactive in our unification issues. Thank you very much. My name is Wang Kaga. I'm an associate professor at Wuhan University. Thank you very much for the 2 presentations. As a Chinese, I would like to now talk about what action should be taken by Korea in terms of education of unification. To briefly speaking, first of all, I can tell you what perception is there for the unification in China. So by the Chinese administration and authorities, there are a lot of discourses of approving unification. And in academia of China, main topics and themes of their researches are the methodologies, challenges for unification, and also the roles to be played by China in the process of unification. These are the main topics discussed by the scholars. So this has been the perception of China about the unification. In addition to that, the perception on the North Korea requires very authentic and truthful background. Since I am working in Wuhan University, we have some issues with the land and borderline because we have the borderline between China and the North Korea. I've been visiting North Korea several times. My impression there has been different every time. So from the news articles and news broadcasting, the North Korea was not viewed correctly or vividly because I saw different things there, and their level of the understanding was higher than we thought. So we were not so much known to the fact of the North Korea. So if I am based on our own bias or perception to talk about unification, that will be so narrow. Therefore, we should be based on the factual things in China, in North Korea. We have to know what's really happening in the North Korea in order to be more objective in our studies. Second thing I can tell you is that what we have to do as an action point for unification and unification education. First of all, I can tell you what information is needed. For of course, at the governmental level, they have to work hard to go forward to the unification process, and also at the private parties, they have to work a lot of the activities, including the sports, culture, and many other people-to-people activities. Thirdly, they can also work among scholars. At the academia, they should have a lot of research programs jointly done. Especially this part is important for the history because we share a lot of history between these countries, especially in the northeast part of China. They share some historical sites with North Korea. For example, the independence movement site in China for the Korean Peninsula. So we have ample opportunity to study further these history. And also the next one, fourth one, is that we can have the consensus built among the people in order to move forward. Because with the counterpart, you should have the consensus to have better understanding, and then our research would be more impressive down the road. My personal experience is that we have the education on the Dokdo in Korea, and I was involved in the public relations of the Dokdo program. When I was making presentation in the beginning, when I introduced the idea of Dokdo to the Chinese people, I didn't get much attention or response from the Chinese people because Chinese people were not interested in that issue anyway. But I learned a lot what to do. So after that, I had the second round of lectures, and I had a lot of pre-work before having the lecture. And the Chinese people, when they have more understanding as a background, they became more interested and more impressed by our lectures. So our effect has gone up because we had the prior work before having the lecture. This has been my view on the awareness on the unification of the Korean Peninsula as a Chinese. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So she talked about things that we have to improve, especially from Chinese perspectives. And she said that the North Korea could be happier. North Korean people could be happier than what we expect. In the sense, I think she somehow threw a very philosophical question of what happiness really means. And also she talked about how we can build consensus. And next, moving on, we have the Marlena Buliashi, from the University of Warsaw, and especially because of the Ukraine invasion, and Poland is just next to the Ukraine. So security issues in Poland is another very important topic that we have to pay attention to. But from EU's perspective, so on what aspects of the Korean unification that they are interested in.
Yes, yesterday we were participating in a session dedicated to Korean War, Ukrainian War with Russia. But thank you for inviting me to this session because it's very interesting. And my perspective, I think it's a little bit different with what we are here observing in Asia, including China, as my colleague just said. And to be honest, I'm I'm an example that education on unification, it's a very necessary issue. I first arrived to Korea in 2014, and that time, unfortunately, I must confess that my knowledge about your country was equal almost zero. And it's due to some reasons, including, of course, also geographical distance. It was a very random decision to choose Korea then for my exchange program, but in the end, it appeared to be a very good choice, and it has a very direct result in my career nowadays. But what I can say about unification topics, how it's proceed in Europe? Unfortunately, as me in 2014, most of my colleagues who are not especially interested in Northeast Asia, in Korean Peninsula, in security issues at all. Unfortunately, when I speak with them and when I tell them what I'm interested in, what I'm doing in here, that I'm participating in such impressive event, and it's organized by the Ministry of Unification, and that there is a topic of unification in Korea, for them it's like totally new concept. For most of them, they hear this term for the first time in their life, and very often they just don't understand what does it mean. I think it's in Poland and probably wider in Europe, it's the same problem because the topic is not discussed. It doesn't mean that we are lazy and we are not interested in. It's the consequence of a very big distance between our regions. It's also a consequence on other problems that we are facing in Europe. It's not necessarily the negligence of Europeans. What can be done with that? I believe that despite all these circumstances that I mentioned, why the situation in Europe is like that, I believe that despite its totally different phenomena. I'm now speaking about K-pop, which was also unknown totally in Europe some years ago, and nowadays it's really known everywhere. Everyone knows K-pop, and you did it despite the fact that we are on the other side of the world. And maybe you can also create some kind of programs of making Europeans more aware of that. There is a very wide net of Korean culture centers. We have one in Europe, in Warsaw, near our university. Maybe not that near, but in very center of Warsaw. That is very active. We have also a diplomatic relation between our countries. We have very prosperous and active embassy that is organizing many events. So maybe it's the way that somehow the unification topic should be undertaken by those two institutions. I'm just thinking about it, and I would like to ask to our audience, to our speakers, if do you have any other ideas? What kind of efforts Republic of Korea should undertake to create a public opinion amicable and make Europeans, but not only Europeans, wider speaking Western society aware of these issues, which we are discussing here on this wonderful forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately,
near from Korea's perspective because of the war in Ukraine. 말레나 블라시 교수께서 특히 유럽에서 느끼는 평화의 문제 이건 중요하다고
thank you very
말씀하셨고
much. Melina said that the understanding about unification is quite important, and also the issue of the Korean Peninsula can be understood that way. So we can find some nexus with that. And K-pop can be fully understood because it's so popular nowadays in the rest of Europe. We can also find another nexus to link the unification issues to the European people so that they can understand better about what's happening in the Korean Peninsula. And she raised a question asking what could be the good idea to expand the understanding and consensus of the Korean Peninsula in the European countries, and her question can be answered later after all these discussions are finished. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Ha Kwang-min, and he's also a pastor as well as a director of administration of Seoul Unification Education Center. He's an expert in unification. Please. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity in this event to talk about unification. I'm working at the Seoul Unification Education Center. Our center is giving information and education to the people residing in Seoul. And then our wish is to expand it to other people, especially the multicultural people and the migrant workers. So we're talking about these issues here today. What we do in our center is quite relevant to the government because we are an organization by the government. So we have to see what kind of raison d'etre or the reason we have to do. So we are based on the law. The law says that we have the support for the unification education, and that law was enacted under the President Kim Dae-jung. Still, it is valid today. So under the law of education of the unification, we have many programs and many organizations. If you look at the purpose of the law of unification education, it includes the protection of the liberal democracy, security, and the awareness of safety and security among the Koreans. So if you see these three purposes, liberal democracy is something that we share, all of us. And the second one is to improve the identity of the nation. So for that part, identity of a nation, can it be getting through to all the multinational people or the migrant workers in Korea? And the third one is the sense of security in a sound manner. The third purpose like this is also easy to be connected with Koreans only. But if it is extended to other people, especially from China or other Asian countries, can it really matter to them? So that's also another thing that we have to solve. We have about 120 members of our center, and none of them are international people currently. What we have to do in the future is to expand the number or increase the number of the multinational people in our center. So first thing I can tell you is that under the law of the education of unification, we have to have some appendix or revision of the law to include the non-Korean people. So that's one thing we have to do. And then when we have the education, as other people mentioned, it is not so much relevant to the other people from other countries. So the relevance is the most important thing to achieve. While I'm doing the education for unification in my career, I learned that learning first is very important. The second important thing is to build a consensus. Without consensus, nothing will happen afterwards. And then the third one is to have the experience. So anything that you learned should be felt through the experiences. So these three are the steps that we are using. If we are, for example, using these programs to international people, what can they learn from the beginning? So we have a lot of tourists from other countries, and we have the residents here. The first place they go is DMZ, actually. If you go to DMZ every Saturday, there are buses after buses having all these non-Korean people. So what would they see? And I know that it's a very interesting place, a very unique place, but I myself have been there very often, and I asked them around where they are coming from. One thing I found very interesting is that these are the mostly descendants of the people who participated in the Korean War as veterans. So the reason for these people to come to DMZ is because they know that their ancestors or the parents or the grandparents have taken part in the war. And we have 16 countries who participate in our war, and we have 21 countries, including the medical supplying countries. And also by country, we have East European countries. But by continent, we have all the continents participating in our war. So the Canada from the North Korea and the US, Canada and India from Asia, Turkey in the Middle East, and South African Republic of South Africa from Africa, and we have the East and Western European countries like Germany, and Greece was representing the Southern Europe, and Denmark was representing the Northern Europe, and Sweden as well. So by continent, every continent were in the Korean War. So that in itself means that Korean War was representing the whole world. Then it is not difficult to make a consensus of the international people because it is truly a international one. But if you go to DMZ again, even if they see something, they do not really feel something because they have nothing to experience hands-on. So if possible, maybe inside the DMZ there can be some place where they can really experience not only from the South Korean side, but also from the North Korean side. Maybe they can step into the North Korean territory. If it is not possible for them to go into the North Korean territory, they can at least have some dialogues or the meetings with the North Korean people. Or at least they can have some kind of opportunities to understand more about the Korean War. They can have some moments to spend in there to learn and experience more of the war. I was impressed by the visit to Cheongdong in the presentation by Mr. Park. They are going to Cheongdong area to feel the history. That's a very good idea, and maybe we can also do something like that. The next thing I would like to say here is that maybe we have to change the wording. We called unification education so far, but this concept of unification education can have different meaning over time. That word used to be called as national security education. The national security education became unification education. So maybe the next word we can use, and as we do now, is peace education. So the concept of this itself is always changing. So probably for the international people, maybe unification makes sense. But if we want to include all the non-national people living in Korea, probably peace can be a better word to choose. So probably we can say the peace unification education as a means to include whole society. So that would be a good idea. Thank you very much.
So Professor Ha talked about his field experiences of providing the education to non-Koreans, and he said that we have to broaden the concept of the unification education, and also we have to develop a multilateral approach of linking the learnings, experiences, and the empathy or resonance. Now, I would like to invite the Baek-in-ju, Senior Research Fellow of Han Peace Institute, for the comment. Thank you very much. I am from Han Peace Institute. I would like to ask you to think about Southeast Asia in terms of peace unification. I think that this is an area where you miss often in providing peace education and unification education, but the Southeast Asia is now emerging as major countries in the world. And already a lot of religious groups and Korean businesses ventured into the Southeast Asian markets, and they have taken roots there. But I think that the politics and the unification diplomacy seem to be a bit late. But based on the foundation built by and the groundwork laid out by the businesses, I hope that we can advance into the Southeast Asia as well. So we have a northern policy and southern policy. And in fact, situations in northern countries seems to become difficult. It's because of the rivalry between China and the U.S., as well as the tensions around the Taiwan. So situations in the northern territory seems to make us very difficult to pursue diplomacy and build amicable relations. And Moon Jae-in administration pursued the diplomacy with the southern countries with the new southern policy, and I believe that we have to continue to have this kind of efforts. And recently, the RCEP took into effect, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that includes the 10 ASEAN nations plus Korea. And this is the largest FTK becoming effective. This shows that the economic exchanges will grow and prosper between Southeast Asia and Korea. And with the signing of this FTA, we will be able to create a customs community and the single market entity. So the ASEAN countries and also countries in Southeast Asia, I think that they are now in a transition to the formation of a single market. And this indicates that we have to pay close attention to what happened among Southeast Asian countries. So with the effectuation of RCEP, or sort of the FTA, meaning that Korea's commodities and goods could be traded freely in Southeast Asian nations. So with the popularity of the K-pop and K-culture, I believe that we can have even wider route to Southeast Asia with the signing of RCEP. And we have to utilize this opportunity, so we should create the contents targeting Southeast Asian nations for more effective peace and unification education. I once visited the airport in in Thailand, and I found that there are huge fans and supporting Lisa of Blackpink. So I thought that we have to make the efficient use of the current popularity over the Korean culture, like the K-drama, like the Crash Landing on You. So we can create great content using the K-drama or the K-culture for unification education. And I think that this will be a very good material. And many foreigners nowadays want to learn Korean language. So the Korean language education is booming in countries in Southeast Asia. And I once visited a Southeast Asian nation, and the lecturer of the Korean language course didn't really have the official certificate, but simply because he was a Korean, so he worked as a teacher. But this indicates that we have to develop a better course and also the great content for education. And we can utilize the Korean language course to teach them about the unification issues and how important this is. And for this, if there are educational material available, then that will also be very great. So yes, we have a lot of educational materials delivering the knowledge on the Korean Peninsula, but I think there are a lot of rooms for improvement. And also there are widespread diaspora in Southeast Asia. In particular, the capital from the Chinese people is very strong. The Chinese dominate the commerce industry there. Maybe we can build a very strong dominance in Southeast Asia in terms of peace and education. And so in that sense, I think that Korea can take a leading role in promoting peace and reconciliation in Southeast Asia. And we have to create a hub of the peace education in South Asian countries. But we should not be ambiguous, unclear. Rather, if we are going to target the Southeast Asian nations for unification education, then we have to establish a hub maybe in Singapore and create contents for them and spread that and expand that. Unification or the national division is a very special phenomenon that not many countries experience. But in this special condition, we have to develop the universal values in order that can resonate with people around the world. And also they can deliver the message on the importance of peace to people around the world. So in doing so, we can instill the message, deliver the message that we have to work together toward peace. So I think that this is the message that the peace education should deliver. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Park. He has been giving us the importance of the consensus with the linkage and sentiment from politics and economy, and then the consensus should be expanded. But the expansion is quite difficult because you said that the black pink is quite popular in Thailand, but I myself have difficulty of having sympathy with them because I'm not a fan of Blackpink nor, and I do not know what Blackpink is actually. Now, next, Mr. Chung Dae-jin, would you like to speak now? I'm not a fan of Blackpink either. I didn't know what Blackpink meant actually. So I actually was asked who the members are in Blackpink, and I was very much embarrassed not being able to answer the question. So we do have a lot of other works to do, that means. Now we have our other sessions in this forum sponsored by the Gangwon, and thank you very much for coming to this event out of your busy schedules. We talk about unification, and we have some kind of blind side of unification issues. That's about the North Korean defectors. So I'm here to talk about the defectors from North Korea. So briefly, I'm going to cover what they can be done with. We talk about the consensus building, sympathy when it comes to unification, but we do really have two different distinct culture from North and South Korea. So far, we have been thinking of unification in terms of education only for the people residing in the same cultural background. So for example, our education was only for the South Korean people because South Koreans were the ones who are subject to the education. And then we are living in the same type of culture. So our education of unification has been geared toward the South Koreans only. But now here in this session, we're talking about what we can do in order to internationalize this unification education for the non-Korean people or non-South Korean people, and how we can do the public diplomacy. So we have one culture which is homogeneous and the other culture which is not homogeneous. And in between them, we have the people who are defectors from North Korea. These defectors were not born in South Korea. Therefore, they are not South Koreans by nature, but they're not international people. They are Koreans anyway. but they can play an important role in between the Koreans and non-Koreans. We have about 3 million defectors from North Korea so far. Frankly speaking, we kind of use them for one purpose, if needed, when they are in need, saying that they are really Koreans. But if the things are turning out adverse, we do not invite them over. We just shun away from them, saying that they are not South Koreans. So that's the dubious position we have had so far. Now, what can we do with them from now on? So we can use a new terminology of the zone of the similar cultures, or we can say that homogeneous culture zone. Mr. Ha and I have been talking very frequently about these issues, and we need to use different approaches, different methodology to deal with these people. They are also becoming some kind of partners for the process of unification if needed. So the defectors from North Korea are standing in between South Koreans as a homogeneous culture and non-Koreans who are international and distinctive culture. But in between them, these defectors from North Korea are sharing some part of the culture with South Koreans and then not sharing some of the cultures with us. So we have to find more of the similarities with them. So if we say that we are living in a homogeneous culture, that's not quite true, because inside South Korea also we have some non-homogeneous cultures amongst ourselves as well. So I have to be very careful in using the right terminology. I'm working at the Halla University, so we say that we have the geographic limitation coming from Baekdu Mountain down to Halla Mountain. But the Halla University where I'm working is located in the Wonju area. So we use the slogan of from Halla to Baekdu for our unification education. If you say Halla or Baekdu, they are meaning that we have the geographic demarcation and the peninsula first, uppermost and then lowermost. If you hear the word of Halla, you might be reminded of Jeju Island because they have Halla Mountain in Jeju. But the Halla I'm talking about is about the Gangwon province, or near from Wonju. So we have to change our standpoint as well. Some of the words we already know, but we have to have deeper understanding. I believe that the North Korean defectors have some sense of bewilderment sometimes because we use the same word, but meanings are different from time to time. So they have to train themselves to understand more what South Koreans are talking when they use the same word, but meaning differently. And also we have some kind of standard Korean language education to North Korean people, the defectors. In that curriculum of learning standard Korean, they complain from time to time because they do not want to change their accents from North Korea, but they're seemingly forced to use standard Korean accent in here, because if we have some people from Jeju Island or other parts of the country in Seoul, if they have the accent, we don't criticize them, but we don't want them to use North Korean accent. So if they feel offended, that would not be so much good for our education on unification or development of such curriculum. So that might be very offensive to them. When we talk about the education for unification, sometimes we invite our lecturers actually coming from North Korea because they want to relay the realities of the North Korea, and some of the defectors are chosen to become lecturers, and they give lectures in the elementary schools or middle and high school schools. Over time, their experiences when they were in the North Korea are not valid anymore sometimes because their realities are changing. For example, before and after COVID, they also have very small number of defectors coming from North Korea, especially after COVID. So they are not able to relay what's really happening at the moment in North Korea. So timeliness is quite important. We have to think if really they're valuable their information is. Even if they are defectors of North Korea, they also have to convey the message from the perspective of South Koreans as well. They're the minor people, but even if they are just working in very important things, they cannot become the mainstream so far. So they want to become mainstream over time. So we have to accept the fact that they don't have to represent the mainstream in Korea. Therefore, we have to start our programs. Maybe we don't have to distinguish between minority and the mainstream. They can just be a part of South Koreans, whether they are minority or whether they are mainstream or not. Because inside South Korea, and we say very proudly that my parents are coming from other regions, not Seoul. There's no problem at all to identify themselves as the non-Seoul people. But if you are coming from North Korea, you don't want to disclose your identity as North Korean people. You don't want to use the North Korean accent. You probably say you're from China, actually, the Chinese Korean. So it's not a good sign for them to identify themselves. So after having this identity issue solved, we can have the next step of the unification education. Along with the internationalization of the programs, we have to also clear up the issues with the North Korean defectors as well. Thank you.
네, 그 우리 동질
사회와 이주 사회의 중간에
Thank you very much.
먼저 우리가 통일의
So he talked about the unification education for North Korean defectors
안착을 위해서 어떻게
and
접근해야 될 것인가.
also how we can develop a sustainable program to help them take roots in the Korean society.
지금까지 왔는데요.
So we have used our time very efficiently. Are there any questions from the floor?
시간. 저희 패널이
If not,
이번에 프리젠터
then
디스커션 들어보셨는데
so for our panel, we have 2 presenters and 5 discussants.
다 같은 그
But I believe that there should be no clear division between the presenters and discussants. Rather, we are now having this session in the format of panel discussion. So everyone on the stage could serve as a panelist. And they deliver diverse perspectives on this issue. And so regarding the comments from the discussants, we would like to ask the presenters to respond. So maybe starting from Mr. Han Chung-hil.
간단한 마무리 말씀.
So can you give us the concluding remark?
엉뚱한 발언일 수 있겠지만
Thank you. It could be like out of place, but let me try.
폴란드에서 오신
From the professor from Poland, she mentioned that the K-pop is popular in Poland, but when it comes to unification issue, it's not really known.
우리 백 교수님
And also the Professor Peck
동남아에서도
mentioned that in Southeast Asia, again, there is a sweeping popularity of the Korean pop culture. So we have to utilize this. And I think that we can link that. So the BTS and Blackpink, we can call them right before the workers' party building. And in fact, one of the famous hip hop group band did the recording of their music video there. So I think this is not a pipe dream. We can invite BTS or the Blackpink to a building with a historical importance on unification and let them create a sort of the music video. Then I think that this will naturally invite attention from all around the world.
문자로 오늘 발표를 통해서
So through today's presentation,
다르기 때문에
because situations are all different by countries, so we cannot integrate all of them, but at least I think we can build some consensus and also create the contents that can resonate with more diverse group of people. And with that, thank you.
Yes, Peter Han has a lot of talents to utilize. Maybe he can be an organizer of an event, performance programs for these entertainers. Now, Mr. Chan, would you like to say a few words for the last? Yes, thank you very much for the discussants. Many ideas have been expressed, and I was able to get some. So I've been thinking about several things. diversity issue can be a factor for the unification education in the future. While doing so, universal values should be pursued continuously in our dialogues and discussions. In my experience of holding the programs, if we start with the human rights, the conservative people in Korea didn't agree with necessarily with the progressive people in Korea. And if we talk about the universal values of human rights with non-Korean people, both conservative and progressive people of Korea were not so much in conflict. So I was able to witness some kind of the convergence of the human rights issues as a really truly universal values. Therefore, when we talk about unification as well, if we have the more international factors coming in, probably we can reach the essence of universal values. Inclusiveness is really important, as mentioned by Mr. Han. So when we talk about the North Korean defectors, we change our attitude to them when the time is good and when the time is bad. Sometimes they are very much welcomed as our compatriot. Sometimes they are shunned away because they are just not just good people for us. Maybe the same attitude can be found when we deal with the non-Korean people in Korea. So we have to think of the homogeneity and non-homogeneity issues, heterogeneity. Let me conclude with my own experience. Last year in our foundation, we had the program for the international students in Halim University in Gangwon-do and many other universities. We had the tour to go around many universities in my region. So according to these international students, they said they were very much impressed by the development of Korea, and the Korea is a country that is unification, and they said they were trying to learn from Korea. They tried to seemingly to be some kind of low profile when they talk about the Korea, but I found that the moment they became suddenly proud was that when they visited the memorial of the Korean War. If you go to the campus of Halim in Gangwon, they have the buildings for the colleges of agriculture, colleges for the livestock, and then we visited Ethiopian pavilion with the Ethiopian students, and they learned that they had their veterans sent to Korea to fight in the Korean War, and they became suddenly very bright, and they were smiling, and they feeling pride in their ancestors. And then I expressed gratitude to them. Your ancestors helped Korea, and that's why Korea survives this way. And then later at the end of the program, I asked them around what was the most impressive one during your visit in Korea. They said that at the moment they visited Ethiopian pavilion for the Korean War was the best moment. So we have to not only emphasize the homogeneity, but also emphasize the heterogeneity in terms of making it more convergent. So if we combine all these two factors, we can have the better development of the unification education, and we can draw a big picture. Thank you.
In this session, we are talking about the internationalization of the unification education and public diplomacy, and we have shared various views as well as research outcomes. It was truly an illuminating session. At the beginning of the session, we talked about the targets and audiences of the peace unification education. And in fact, these target audiences have become very diverse. And also various actors are now being involved, and the contents have been diversified. But how can we create the content that can resonate with a lot of people? There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Rather, we have to acknowledge the differences and find out the wisdom to live together. So we live with difference, but together. And I think this is the philosophy that we have to embed in our education program. Then what should we do to realize this? First of all, we have to develop customized training programs, education programs for various target groups. And for that, project and have to be pursued in a more diverse way, and human network has to be fostered in a consistent manner. And especially for those who are working in the field for unification education, what they ask for is that there must be more diverse kind of content customized to different audiences. And this is something that can be taken up by the government or other relevant organizations. And for this, I think that we can also think about establishing a platform where these different educational materials are all pulled and uploaded. So far we have talked about the current status and future prospects for the unification education, and it was truly meaningful and productive session. And we were also able to see a lot of tasks that we have to do in the future. And with that, we would like to conclude our session. I would like to thank once again all the panelists as well as the audiences. Thank you very much.